The Empire had conquered 47 star systems in the last century. Their crimson warships carved through space like predators, leaving behind subjugated worlds and broken civilizations. The Empire's military doctrine was simple: overwhelming force, superior technology, and the unwavering belief that their warrior caste represented the pinnacle of galactic evolution. Admiral stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Crimson Talon, his scaled hands clasped behind his back as he gazed at the blue-green marble suspended in the void before them. Earth, the third planet of a small yellow star, home to a species that had somehow managed to unite their fractured world and venture into space despite being one of the youngest civilizations in known space. "Preliminary scans are complete, Admiral," reported his tactical officer, a young whose crest still bore the bright orange of inexperience. "The humans have established a modest defense grid around their planet. Approximately 200 vessels of various classes, mostly armed cargo haulers and converted civilian craft." His mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his species. 200 ships against our battle fleet of 50 dreadnoughts and 300 support vessels. They either possess courage that borders on insanity or ignorance that defies comprehension. The Admiral had studied the human files extensively during the 3-month journey from space. Humans were remarkable in their diversity and adaptability, but they lacked the natural weapons of most spacefaring species. No claws, no natural armor, no venomous fangs or acid sacs. They were soft-bodied creatures who had somehow clawed their way out of their gravity well through determination and ingenuity alone. "Sir," the communications officer interrupted, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. It's addressed to you personally." On screen, the main display flickered to life, revealing a human female in what appeared to be a military uniform. Her dark skin was marked by scars, and her eyes held the steady gaze of someone who had seen combat. Behind her, the bridge of her vessel buzzed with activity as crew members prepared for battle. "I am Admiral Sarah of the United Earth Defense Force," the human said, her voice carrying clearly across the void between their fleets. "I assume you're here to demand our surrender." Stepped forward, allowing his full 8-foot frame to dominate the camera's view. His battle scars caught the bridge's amber lighting, and his ceremonial war talons gleamed at his sides. "I am Admiral of the Crimson Fleet. Your species has attracted the attention of the Empire. We offer you the same choice we have offered 47 other civilizations: submit to imperial rule and become a client state, or face the consequences of resistance." Admiral's expression didn't change. "And what exactly do those consequences entail?" "Complete orbital bombardment of your military installations, followed by ground invasion and subjugation. Your species would survive, but your independence would not." His voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "We are warriors born and bred for conquest. Our technology is superior, our ships more numerous, our soldiers more experienced. This is not a negotiation, Admiral. This is an inevitable conclusion." The human admiral was quiet for a long moment, her eyes studying something off-camera. When she looked back, there was something different in her expression, not fear but calculation. "Admiral, I have a counter-proposal. Single combat, champion against champion, winner takes all." The bridge of the Crimson Talon fell silent except for the hum of the ship systems. Tactical officers exchanged glances, their crests shifting to colors of confusion and disbelief. "Single combat," repeated slowly. "You would stake your entire species' freedom on the outcome of individual combat." "That's correct. Your greatest warrior against our champion. Traditional weapons only, no energy weapons, no ranged combat beyond thrown implements. Close quarters combat until one yields or dies." His mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of intense thought. The proposal was absurd, but it appealed to the warrior culture that defined society. Single combat was how disputes had been settled on the before they took to the stars. It was honorable, pure, and decisive. "This is highly irregular," he said finally. "What makes you believe any human could stand against a warrior in single combat?" Admiral smiled, and there was something predatory in that expression. "Call it human confidence, or arrogance if you prefer. But those are our terms. Accept, and we fight according to the old ways. Decline, and we'll show you exactly why humanity didn't stay on one planet." The threat in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. Had studied enough human history to know that this species had a disturbing tendency to fight harder when cornered. Their military doctrines seemed to revolve around asymmetric warfare and unconventional tactics. Even victory against them would likely be costly. "Very well," said after consulting with his war council through silent gestures. "I accept your terms. The combat will take place on the surface of your moon in 72 hours. This will give both sides time to prepare and transport our champions to the designated location." "Agreed. We'll transmit coordinates for a suitable location on Luna. May the best warrior win, Admiral." The transmission ended, leaving alone with his thoughts and his senior officers. Captain, his second-in-command, approached with obvious concern, coloring his crest a deep purple. "Admiral, with respect, this seems like an unnecessary risk. We have overwhelming firepower advantage. Why honor this primitive ritual when we could simply crush them?" Turned to gaze out at the human fleet, noting how they had begun to spread into defensive formations despite the ceasefire. "Because, Captain, the warrior's path demands honor even in conquest, and because I suspect these humans are more dangerous than they appear. Better to settle this with honor than to learn the hard way that our assumptions about them are incorrect." The next 72 hours passed quickly. They selected their champion, commander, veteran of 37 single combats and slayer of the Beetle Kings of Antares. Standing nearly 9 feet tall and weighing over 400 pounds of dense muscle and natural armor, was the embodiment of martial prowess. His claws had been ritually sharpened, his scales oiled and polished, and his mind prepared through meditation and combat stimulants. The human selection remained a mystery. Their communications had been politely evasive when asked about their champion, stating only that they would arrive at the designated time and location. Luna's surface had been prepared for combat. A large, flat crater had been selected, its floor cleared of debris and marked with the ritual circle traditional to single combat. Atmospheric generators created a breathable environment within energy barriers, and sophisticated medical facilities stood ready on both sides. Watched from his observation post as the human transport landed precisely on schedule. The craft was utilitarian, obviously designed for function rather than intimidation. When the airlock opened, leaned forward in anticipation, wondering what manner of augmented supersoldier or genetically enhanced warrior the humans had produced. What emerged was not what anyone had expected. A human male of average height stepped onto Luna's surface, moving with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in low gravity. He wore simple coveralls that had seen better days, with Martinez stitched over one pocket and Luna City orbital maintenance over the other. In one hand he carried what appeared to be a large wrench, easily 3 feet long and obviously well used. His other hand held a small toolkit. Commander had arrived minutes earlier, resplendent in his ceremonial combat harness, his natural weapons gleaming in the artificial light. The warrior stood in the ritual circle, performing the traditional combat forms with fluid grace that spoke of decades of training. The human, Martinez, apparently walked to the edge of the circle and set down his toolkit with the same care someone might use when arriving for a day's work. He tested the weight of his wrench, made a few practice swings, and then looked up at his opponent with calm, professional interest. "You have got to be kidding me," Captain whispered from beside Admiral. "They sent a maintenance worker." Admiral's voice crackled over the communications channel. "I present our champion, Roberto Martinez, Senior Orbital Maintenance Technician, Luna City Station. 37 years of experience keeping our orbital infrastructure running, 15 years as a professional gravitational sports athlete before that, and currently the undisputed arm wrestling champion of the Outer System Workers Union." Stared at the scene below, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "Admiral, surely this is some form of jest. This person appears to be a common laborer." "Roberto's not common anything, Admiral. He's kept Luna Station running through 3 solar storms, 2 pirate raids, and 1 fairly memorable reactor containment failure. But if you're having second thoughts about the combat..." No, his pride would not allow him to back down now, regardless of how surreal the situation had become. "The combat will proceed as agreed." Down in the crater, Roberto Martinez had finished his preparations. He looked up at Commander, who stood nearly 2 feet taller and outweighed him by at least 200 pounds, and nodded politely. "Morning," Roberto said, his voice carrying clearly in the thin atmosphere. "Hope you don't take this personal, just doing a job here." His response was a roar that echoed off the crater walls, followed by a ritual declaration of combat in the ancient tongue. Roberto listened politely, then shifted his grip on the wrench and dropped into a ready stance that looked more like a batter preparing for a fastball than any formal combat form. The signal to begin came from a neutral automated system. Launched himself forward with the speed and ferocity of a natural predator, claws extended and mandibles spread wide. It was a charge that had ended dozens of single combats in the past, an overwhelming display of aggression designed to intimidate and destroy. Roberto stepped aside with an economy of movement that spoke of someone intimately familiar with confined spaces and moving machinery. As passed by, the human's wrench came around in a short, controlled arc that caught the warrior precisely behind the left knee joint, the one spot where the natural armor plates didn't overlap. The sound that emerged from was somewhere between a roar of pain and a hiss of surprise. He stumbled, recovered, and spun to face his opponent again, now moving with a pronounced limp. "Sorry about that," Roberto called out conversationally. "But you've got a bearing that's been running hot for a while now, probably want to get that looked at." What followed was unlike any single combat in history. Roberto fought like someone who understood mechanical systems, finding stress points, exploiting weaknesses, and applying precisely the right amount of force in exactly the right location to achieve maximum effect. When charged again, Roberto wasn't there. When the warrior tried to use his reach advantage, he found his attacks deflected by a wrench wielded with the precision of someone who worked with delicate equipment for a living. The humans, it seemed, had sent someone who viewed the warrior as simply another complex system that needed adjustment. 20 minutes into the combat was breathing heavily, his earlier confidence replaced by growing frustration and confusion. He had landed several glancing blows, but Roberto moved with the fluid efficiency of someone who had spent decades working in zero gravity, where every movement had to be precise and purposeful. "You fight like a mechanic," snarled during a brief pause in the action. Roberto considered this while wiping sweat from his forehead. "Well, yeah, that's what I am, and right now you're a machine that's not working right. Give me a few more minutes and I'll have you sorted out." The final exchange came when, desperate to end the humiliating combat, attempted his species' most devastating attack, a leaping strike that combined his full body weight with the cutting power of his claws. It was a move that had never failed to end a fight. Roberto watched the warrior launch into the air, calculated trajectories with the instinctive skill of someone who spent his working life dealing with orbital mechanics, and stepped forward instead of back. His wrench came up in a perfect uppercut that caught in the solar plexus, just as gravity brought the warrior back down to Luna's surface. The impact drove every molecule of air from his lungs and sent him crashing to the crater floor, where he lay gasping like a landed fish. Roberto stood over his fallen opponent, wrench resting casually on his shoulder. "You yield, or do I need to make some more adjustments?" Commander, greatest warrior of the Empire, raised one trembling hand in the traditional gesture of surrender. The silence that followed was deafening. The aftermath of the single combat sent shockwaves through both fleets. Aboard the Crimson Talon, Admiral stood in stunned silence as his medical teams rushed to attend to Commander. The warrior was alive but thoroughly defeated, his pride as shattered as several of his ribs. The implications of what had just occurred threatened to undermine everything the Empire believed about itself. Captain approached hesitantly, his crest displaying the muted browns of confusion and concern. "Admiral, the combat?" The terms were clear, according to our agreement. "The Earth is under human control," finished, his voice hollow. "Yes, Captain, I am aware of the implications." He turned from the viewing portal where Roberto Martinez was helping his former opponent to his feet with the same professional courtesy he might show a colleague after fixing their equipment. "Inform the fleet commanders. We are withdrawing to the edge of the system to reassess our position." The withdrawal was conducted with as much dignity as the fleet could muster, but there was no disguising the fact that they were retreating from a single human with a wrench. Admiral had transmitted her thanks for honoring the agreement and extended an invitation for formal diplomatic contact, but was too shell-shocked to respond immediately. 3 days later, as the Crimson Fleet established a temporary base in the asteroid belt beyond Mars, finally requested a private communication with Admiral. He found her in what appeared to be her ready room, reviewing reports with the same calm efficiency she had displayed throughout the crisis. Admiral began, struggling to find words that wouldn't compromise what remained of his dignity. "I must confess that the outcome of our combat was unexpected." I imagine it was, replied diplomatically. Roberto's good at what he does. That man, Martinez, he is truly just a maintenance worker. Leaned back in her chair, studying the Admiral with obvious interest. Roberto Martinez has been working orbital maintenance for Luna City for 15 years. Before that, he played professional gravitational ball in the Jupiter Leagues until a knee injury ended his career. He's got 2 kids, a mortgage on a small apartment in Luna City's residential sector, and he builds model starships in his spare time. She paused. He's also the guy we call when the impossible needs to be fixed. His mandibles clicked slowly as he processed this information. Your species sent a civilian against our greatest warrior. Our species sent the right tool for the job, corrected gently. Roberto wasn't chosen because he's a great warrior. He was chosen because he's great at figuring out how things work and making them work better. Your champion was just another complex system that needed some adjustment. The Admiral spent the next several days in his quarters, poring over human files and trying to understand what his species had stumbled into. The more he learned about humanity, the more disturbed he became. These weren't the soft, defenseless creatures they had appeared to be from their preliminary assessments. Humans, it seemed, had a disturbing tendency to treat warfare as simply another engineering problem to be solved. His research was interrupted by an urgent communication from Captain. Admiral, we have a situation. Long-range sensors are detecting multiple human vessels approaching our position. Hurried to the bridge, expecting to find the human fleet closing in for what they presumed would be an easy victory over a demoralized enemy. What he found instead all military logic. Sir, reported his sensor operator, the approaching vessels appear to be cargo ships, mixed configuration freighters mostly. They're broadcasting commercial identification codes and requesting permission to approach for trade negotiations. Trade negotiations? Stared at the tactical display in bewilderment. We just attempted to conquer there 3 days ago. Captain's crest had shifted to the deep purple of complete confusion. Sir, the lead vessel is requesting permission to come aboard. They claim to have a business proposition that would interest us. Against his better judgment, agreed to the meeting. The human transport that docked with his flagship was a battered freight hauler that had obviously seen decades of use. The airlock cycled open to reveal 3 humans in civilian clothing, led by a middle-aged woman with graying hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to negotiating complex deals. Admiral, the woman said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. I'm Captain Sarah, representing the Outer System Freight Haulers Association. We understand you're in need of supplies and services. Stared at the offered hand but didn't take it. Captain, I believe there has been some misunderstanding. My fleet is a military force that recently, from an attempted conquest of your... Oh, we're aware of that, replied cheerfully, apparently unbothered by his lack of response to her greeting. But you're still people and people need things. Food, medical supplies, entertainment, luxury goods. We can provide all of that and more. The way we see it, business is business. The audacity of the proposal left speechless for several moments. You wish to trade with us, after we threatened your species with conquest and slavery. Captain exchanged glances with her companions before answering. Admiral, the way we figure it, you tried to conquer us according to your cultural traditions. We defended ourselves according to ours. That's settled now. But you've got a fleet of 50,000 personnel sitting out here in space, far from home, probably running low on supplies and getting bored. We've got cargo holds full of goods and services, and we're always interested in new markets. One of her companions, a younger man with the calloused hands of someone who worked with machinery, stepped forward. We've been analyzing your ship configurations from the public sensor data. Interesting designs, but we notice some efficiency problems. We might be able to help with those. Efficiency problems? Captain interjected, his crest flaring orange with indignation. These are the finest warships in the galaxy. The human engineer shrugged. Maybe, but your power distribution systems are running about 15% hotter than optimal, and your hyperspace motivators are generating harmonic resonances that are probably cutting your fuel efficiency by at least 20%. Nothing that couldn't be fixed with some modifications to your energy coupling arrays. Admiral found himself in the surreal position of listening to humans offer to improve military technology while his fleet sat in the aftermath of a failed invasion. You would help us upgrade our ships. For a fair price, absolutely, Captain confirmed. We've also got entertainment packages, music, literature, games, immersive experiences, plus luxuries you can't get in this part of space. Real coffee, chocolate, aged whiskey, authentic Earth cuisine. Your crew's been away from home for months, right? They've got to be getting tired of military rations. The negotiations that followed were unlike anything in its experience. The humans were shrewd but fair, offering goods and services at competitive prices while carefully avoiding anything that could be construed as military aid to a potentially hostile force. They were, however, quite willing to discuss entertainment systems, food services, and civilian-grade technological improvements. Within a week, the asteroid belt around Mars had been transformed into an impromptu marketplace. Human freight haulers arrived daily with cargo holds full of goods, while personnel on shore leave crowded the converted cargo bays that had been hastily transformed into trading posts and recreational facilities. Admiral watched from his ready room as his warriors sampled human cuisine, listened to human music, and engaged in animated conversations with human traders who showed no fear despite being surrounded by one of the most powerful military fleets in the galaxy. "Sir," Captain reported during their daily briefing, "morale has improved dramatically over the past week. The crew is happier than they've been since we left space. And our combat readiness actually improved, sir. The humans were right about our power distribution problems. The modifications they suggested have increased our energy output by 12% across the fleet. And the food, well, sir, have you tried their chocolate?" Had in fact tried human chocolate. It was disturbingly addictive. His contemplation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the bridge. "Admiral, we're receiving a priority transmission from High Command." The holographic image that materialized in his ready room showed Supreme Admiral Al, commander of all military forces and personal advisor to the Emperor. The Supreme Admiral's crest bore the deep crimsons and golds of high rank, and his expression was stern. Admiral Al's voice carried the authority of absolute command. "Your mission reports have been irregular. Explain the current status of the human conquest." Straightened, knowing that his career and possibly his life hung in the balance of the next few minutes. "Supreme Admiral, the situation has developed in an unexpected manner. The humans proved more resourceful than anticipated. I am told that you accepted single combat with these primitives, and that our champion was defeated by a civilian maintenance worker." "That is technically accurate, sir." Supreme Admiral Al was silent for a long moment, his crest shifting through several shades of what recognized as barely controlled rage. "You allowed the honor of the Empire to be decided by individual combat with an untrained human." "Sir, the human was not untrained. He was simply trained differently than we anticipated," chose his words carefully. "These humans approach problems in ways that are difficult to predict." "And the current status of your fleet?" "We are conducting extended diplomatic and intelligence-gathering operations, sir." The Supreme Admiral's image leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Admiral, are you telling me that the Crimson Fleet is engaged in trade negotiations with the species you were sent to conquer?" The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Had seen officers executed for lesser failures than losing an entire invasion to a man with a wrench. But as he prepared to explain the inexplicable situation he found himself in, an idea began to form. "Sir, I believe we have discovered something far more valuable than another client state." "Explain." "The humans possess a form of adaptability that could be useful to the Empire. Their approach to problem-solving is unlike anything we have encountered. Rather than rely on superior force or advanced technology, they seem to find innovative solutions using whatever resources are available." Gestured toward the data displays showing human trade goods and technological improvements. "In 1 week, human civilians have identified and corrected efficiency problems that our best engineers missed. They have provided recreational services that have improved fleet morale beyond anything in our records. And they have done all of this while treating our failed invasion as simply another business opportunity." Supreme Admiral Al studied the data streams for several minutes before responding. "You believe these humans could be useful allies rather than subjects?" "I believe, sir, that attempting to conquer humanity might be the most expensive victory in Imperial history, but forming a trade relationship with them could be far more profitable than subjugation." The Supreme Admiral's crest shifted to the deep greens of contemplation. Maintain your current position, Admiral. I will discuss this matter with the Emperor. In the meantime, continue your diplomatic operations. The transmission ended, leaving alone with the realization that his military career now depended entirely on the business acumen of human freight haulers and the engineering skills of a maintenance worker with a wrench. Outside his viewport, Roberto Martinez was helping a team of engineers understand the finer points of human power coupling technology, using a maintenance manual and what appeared to be hand-drawn diagrams. The man who had single-handedly ended an invasion was now patiently explaining why their hyperspace motivators were generating unnecessary heat. Admiral poured himself a glass of human whiskey, another addiction his crew had developed, and contemplated the strange turn his life had taken. 3 weeks ago, he had been the commander of an unstoppable invasion force. Now he was apparently the Empire's first diplomat to humanity, and his flagship had become an impromptu trade station where warriors and mechanics discussed engineering problems over shared meals. It wasn't the conquest he had planned, but it might be the beginning of something far more significant than anyone had imagined. 6 months after the single combat that ended an invasion before it began, the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter had become the most unlikely diplomatic center in the galaxy. What started as an impromptu trade relationship had evolved into something far more complex and significant. Admiral no longer wore his military dress uniform to morning briefings. Instead, he had adopted what his human contacts called business casual, a compromise between formal wear and human practicality that somehow managed to look both professional and approachable. The change in clothing reflected a broader transformation that was occurring throughout the Crimson Fleet. "Admiral," Captain reported as he entered the ready room that had been converted into a diplomatic office. "The morning trade reports show another 15% increase in volume over last week, and we've received formal requests from 12 more human corporations wanting to establish trade relationships." Reviewed the data on his tablet, marveling at the complexity of the economic ecosystem that had developed around his military fleet. Human traders weren't just selling luxury goods and entertainment anymore. They were offering technological consultations, cultural exchange programs, and educational services. Several officers were taking correspondence courses from human universities, while human engineers were learning about materials science and power systems. "Any word from High Command?" asked carefully. "Supreme Admiral Al is arriving tomorrow for a personal inspection of our operations." Both officers fell silent. The past 6 months had been a comfortable limbo, but they both knew that their unconventional situation couldn't continue indefinitely. The Empire was built on conquest and subjugation. Trade partnerships and cultural exchange were not part of the imperial model. A chime from the communication system interrupted their brooding. The face that appeared on the screen was familiar. Captain Sarah, the freight hauler who had initiated the first trade contact and had since become something resembling an unofficial ambassador between the two species. Admiral smiled warmly. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. I wanted to give you a heads up about something that's developing back on Earth." "What kind of development, Captain?" "Well, word about your situation here has gotten back to the major corporations and government agencies. There's a lot of interest in formalizing our relationship, but there's also some concern about the long-term implications." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "People are asking questions about whether this is a genuine diplomatic opportunity or if you're just bidding your time before resuming hostilities." Had been expecting this conversation for weeks. "Captain, I understand the concern. A military fleet sitting in your system is naturally viewed as a potential threat, regardless of current circumstances." "That's exactly the issue. And there's something else. We've been monitoring communication networks, and we know your Supreme Admiral is coming for an inspection. People are wondering if that means the trade relationships are about to end and the shooting is about to start." Captain's crest shifted to the orange of alarm. "Captain, surely you don't believe—" "I don't know what to believe," interrupted gently. "But I do know that a lot of people are getting nervous, and nervous people make bad decisions. I thought you should know that some of the more militant factions on Earth are pushing for a preemptive strike against your fleet." The words hit like a physical blow. The idea that humans might attack first had never occurred to him. His species' military doctrine was based on overwhelming force and direct confrontation. The concept of a preemptive strike against a superior military force seemed like tactical insanity. Captain, surely your military leadership understands the impossibility of defeating a fleet of this size with the forces at Earth's disposal. His expression grew grim. Admiral, you're thinking like a traditional military strategist. Humans don't always fight fair, and we definitely don't always fight the way our opponents expect us to. She touched something off-screen, and the display shifted to show a tactical analysis that made his blood run cold. Instead of plans for a direct military confrontation, the human strategy appeared to focus on infrastructure disruption, supply line interdiction, and what they termed asymmetric warfare principles. This plan assumes that your fleet is dependent on the trade relationships we've established for food, medical supplies, and recreational services, explained clinically. Cut off those supplies, introduce some targeted computer viruses into your entertainment systems, and then deploy a series of small, fast ships carrying high-yield fusion devices. Not to destroy your fleet, but to disable key vessels and force you into a siege situation where your numerical advantage becomes a liability. Captain stared at the display in horror. They would attack civilian trade vessels. No, corrected, they would nationalize the civilian trade vessels and turn them into military assets. Every freight hauler becomes a potential weapons platform. Every trade negotiation becomes an intelligence-gathering opportunity. Every cultural exchange becomes a chance to plant monitoring devices or software. Felt a chill that had nothing to do with the asteroid belt's ambient temperature. Captain, are you warning us about this strategy or threatening us with it? I'm warning you about it because I believe the trade relationship we've built is more valuable than whatever military victory either side might achieve. But Admiral, you need to understand that not everyone shares that opinion. She leaned forward, her expression intense. When your Supreme Admiral arrives tomorrow, he's going to find himself in the middle of a very delicate situation. How he handles it could determine whether we continue building something unprecedented, or whether we all find ourselves in the middle of a war that nobody really wants. The communication ended, leaving both officers staring at tactical displays that showed just how vulnerable their mighty fleet had become. Over the past 6 months, they had grown dependent on human suppliers for everything from fresh food to technical expertise. They had allowed human technicians access to their ship systems. They had formed personal relationships with human traders and entrepreneurs. They had, in short, allowed themselves to be thoroughly infiltrated by a species that treated warfare as simply another form of problem-solving. "Sir," Captain said quietly, "what do we do?" Before could answer, another communication chimed. This time the caller was Roberto Martinez, the maintenance worker whose victory in single combat had started this entire situation. "Admiral," Roberto's voice was warm and familiar, "I hear your boss is coming to visit tomorrow. Thought you might want some help preparing for the meeting." "Mr. Martinez," replied carefully, "I'm not certain what assistance you could provide with a military inspection." Roberto's laugh was genuine and reassuring. "Admiral, I've been fixing things for 30 years. Meetings, machinery, relationships. They're all just systems that need the right adjustment. And from what I hear, this meeting could use some serious fine-tuning." "What exactly are you proposing?" "Well, the way I see it, your Supreme Admiral is coming here expecting either a military victory or a military failure. But what you've actually got is something completely different, a working model for interspecies cooperation that's been profitable for everyone involved." Roberto paused, apparently consulting notes. "The question is, how do you present that in terms that a military leader can understand and accept?" Found himself leaning forward despite his better judgment. "Continue." "I've been talking to some folks on Earth, government types, business leaders, even some military people. Turns out there's a lot of interest in expanding this relationship beyond just trade. But everyone's nervous about the military situation." Roberto's tone became more serious. "What if we could find a way to address those concerns while giving your Supreme Admiral something he could present to his Emperor as a victory?" "I'm listening." "Joint military exercises, technology sharing agreements, cultural exchange programs, formal diplomatic recognition." Roberto ticked off items on what sounded like a prepared list. "Instead of conquest, you get alliance. Instead of subjugation, you get partnership. And instead of the costs of occupying a hostile world, you get the profits of trading with a friendly one." Captain's crest had shifted to the deep blues of intense thought. Mr. Martinez, are you suggesting that we present our failed invasion as a successful diplomatic mission? I'm suggesting that you present your successful diplomatic mission as exactly what it is, a better outcome than invasion would have been. Roberto's voice carried the confidence of someone who had solved similar problems before. Look at the numbers, Admiral. In 6 months of trade relationships, your fleet has acquired more useful technology upgrades, cultural enrichment, and economic benefit than most successful military campaigns provide in years. And you've done it without losing a single ship or crew member. Stared at the data displays that had become so familiar over the past months. Roberto was right. The practical benefits of their current situation far exceeded what a traditional conquest would have provided, but the political implications were staggering. Mr. Martinez, what you're proposing would require fundamentally changing how the Empire approaches interspecies relationships. Maybe, Roberto acknowledged, but change isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes the old way of doing things stops working and you need to try something new. That's how progress happens. The next 18 hours passed in a blur of preparation, consultation, and increasingly complex negotiations. Representatives from Earth's government arrived to participate in formal diplomatic talks. Human corporate executives prepared detailed proposals for expanded trade relationships. And somewhere in the background, Roberto Martinez worked with both human and technical teams to prepare demonstrations of the technological advances that had resulted from their cooperation. When Supreme Admiral Al's flagship emerged from hyperspace, it entered a system that bore no resemblance to the war zone he had expected. Instead of a conquered world or a defeated fleet, he found the asteroid belt bustling with commercial activity, his own ships integrated into a complex network of trade relationships, and his officers engaged in what appeared to be enthusiastic technical discussions with human engineers. The Supreme Admiral's first transmission was brief and pointed. Admiral, report to my flagship immediately for debriefing. The meeting took place in the formal conference room of the dreadnought Imperial Will, under the stern gaze of portraits depicting centuries of military victories. Supreme Admiral Al sat at the head of a polished table that reflected the room's amber lighting, his ceremonial armor gleaming and his expression unreadable. Admiral, Al began without preamble, explain to me how a military conquest became a trade negotiation. Had spent hours preparing for this moment, but facing the Supreme Admiral's intimidating presence, all of his carefully rehearsed explanations seemed inadequate. Instead, he found himself speaking from the heart. Sir, we encountered a species that doesn't respond to traditional military pressure the way other civilizations have. Rather than submit or resist conventionally, they adapted. They turned our strength into their opportunity and our aggression into their advantage. He gestured toward the data displays showing 6 months of successful cooperation. What we discovered is that humans don't just survive conflict, they transform it into something beneficial for everyone involved. Supreme Admiral Al studied the reports in silence for several minutes before responding. These trade relationships have indeed been profitable. But Admiral, the Empire's strength comes from military dominance, not commercial partnerships. If we are seen as traders rather than conquerors, our other client states may begin to question their subjugation. Sir, with respect, what if that's exactly what we want them to do? The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything the Empire represented. Al's crest shifted through several colors before settling on the deep crimson of barely contained anger. Explain yourself, Admiral. Sir, maintaining an empire through military force is expensive. It requires constant vigilance, regular military intervention, and substantial resource allocation for occupation forces. But maintaining an empire through economic cooperation pulled up comparative analyses that Roberto and his team had prepared. The profit margins are significantly higher, the stability is greater, and the long-term growth potential is exponential. Before the Supreme Admiral could respond, the conference room's communication system chimed with an incoming message. Sirs, the voice of Al's communications officer crackled through the speakers, we're receiving a formal diplomatic transmission from Earth's government. They're requesting permission to present a joint proposal for interspecies cooperation. Supreme Admiral Al and Admiral exchanged glances. This was the moment that would determine not just the fate of their mission, but possibly the future direction of the entire empire. Put them through, Al commanded. The holographic display activated to show not just Admiral, but a collection of human officials, business leaders, and technical experts. And standing slightly behind them all, still wearing his maintenance coveralls, was Roberto Martinez. Supreme Admiral Al, Admiral began formally. On behalf of the United Earth Government and the human species, we would like to propose a new model for interspecies relations based on mutual benefit, technological cooperation, and shared prosperity. What followed was the most comprehensive diplomatic presentation in galactic history, covering everything from trade agreements to joint military exercises to cultural exchange programs. But at its heart was a simple proposal. Instead of conquest and subjugation, why not try partnership and cooperation? Supreme Admiral Al listened without interruption, his expression revealing nothing. When the presentation concluded, he was silent for a long moment before addressing the humans directly. This proposal would require fundamental changes to imperial policy and doctrine. Such decisions are not mine to make alone. Roberto Martinez stepped forward, his movement relaxed and confident despite being in the presence of the most powerful military leader in known space. Supreme Admiral, sometimes the best solutions are the ones that change everything. All you need is the right tool for the job. Al studied the human who had defeated a champion with nothing but a wrench and practical thinking. And what tool would you recommend for this particular job, Mr. Martinez? Roberto smiled, the same easy expression he had worn when facing Commander in single combat months earlier. Trust, sir, just trust.